Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you.
So tonight I had one of those tours that when I was experiencing it, I was just like, this is only mildly irritating. And it was only when I was trying to tell my friend what happened on the tour later that I realized, no, this was a lot. So small group, which the fun thing about small groups is, the chance of there being chaos on the tour is lower. The problem is it's a lot harder to ignore the chaos when it happens. And this group we're going to call the normal pair, the drunk pair, and the high pair. And the first sign of trouble was the high pair were very late. They arrived 2 minutes after the tour was supposed to start, on the phone with the office, being like, oh my God, we're so lost. And so we immediately set out, and I'm like, okay, let's get going. And as we're walking over, they keep trying to walk ahead of me. And I'm like, guys, slow down, walk behind me, or at least with me. And then the guy receives a phone call and is just answering it while walking, and that's fine. We're not at a story. He can answer a phone call, even though it is slightly rude. But the problem is, he doesn't hang up when we get to the first location and I start talking. And like I keep giving him like signals of like, come on and come join the group. And he does come join the group, but he doesn't hang up the phone call. So he is literally just standing there next to me while I'm trying to do the introduction of the tour. And eventually, it was probably only like 2 sentences into the story, but still, about 2 sentences into the story, he finally hangs up and is like, call you back later. And I'm like, okay. And they were the high couple was also a bit weird at that first stop because they planted themselves on either side of me and slightly behind me, so they were in my peripheral vision the entire time. And I don't like it when people do this because I like to be able to face my guests. And specifically, I like to be able to occasionally make eye contact with them to, check on them, but also I like to be able to project my voice in the right direction, and I can't project my voice out of the side of my head. So it's convenient to have people in front of you. And like I actually say at the first stop, gather around in front of me so I can see your beautiful faces. But that's fine. I stressed heavily in this rule because I suspected it might be a problem that, no disruptions with phones on the tour. I don't want to hear ringtone. I need to not be hearing ringtones constantly. And also, please don't take phone calls while we're talking. But good first stop. Heading to the second stop, the girl from the high couple asked me if there's a daiquiri place that she can stop in on the way over to get daiquiris. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to walk by like 5. And I tell her, like, what you want to do is you want to go in or have your boyfriend go in and the other one stay with the tour so y'all can text and make it back. And we walk by a daiquiri shop. She goes in and the drunk couple just sort of stop. And I look at them and go, okay, guys, we're not waiting for her. She's going to catch up. And they're like, oh, but we're thinking about getting daiquiris too. And I'm like, okay, well, if you are, send someone in and we're continuing on. We need to get to the next stop. And they just don't move. And I'm sitting there like waving at them like 3 times, be like, guys, we need to keep going. If you're going in for drinks, do it. We're going to be right over there. And finally, I just walk off and they do eventually follow me, but very slowly. And I get to the next stop and I'm talking to, at this point, the high guy and the normal pair. And the drunk people slowly make their way over. And like 2 sentences in that stop, the high guy gets a phone call. And I know it's his girlfriend trying to like make their way back. And I'm sitting here like, you can literally just wave at her. She's right over there. But instead, they're talking on the phone, including when she arrives. They're still talking on the phone. And when she arrives, they're also chatting about what she got. And I'm like, oh my God. And it was fine. We move on. On the way to the next stop, we walk by a rat, which is not a big deal. Rats are pretty common in every city, but especially so in New Orleans. And the drunk girl insists that she's never seen rats before. The city she lives in doesn't have rats. And I'm like, it does. Trust me, it does. She also didn't believe it was a rat at first. She thought it was a squirrel, and her husband kept having to tell her, no, honey, it's a rat. And I'm like, it is, and it's not a big deal. But the next stop was mostly good, except for the fact that there was a woman having a fight with someone about a block away. So, like, as long as I was speaking loudly, you couldn't hear anything. But if I paused or got quiet, you could hear a little bit in the background, like, you motherfucker, and stuff like that. So, needless to say, I talked as loudly and as quickly as I possibly can throughout that entire stop and kept a close ear open, hoping that they wouldn't come any closer. And I did notice that the high couple in the middle of that stop pulled out a little baggie of something and like kept sampling something small, and I don't think it was snacks because they got noticeably higher from that point on. But it was fine. And as we're starting to head out, I'm talking to the guy from the drunk couple, and he's like, yeah, it was a bit distracting at that stop. And I was like wondering, the guy getting high or the woman screaming? And he was like, that guy over there doing acrobatics. And I'm like, what? And I look over, and sure enough, there's a guy doing like handstands and the sideways handstands that you do on poles, like right behind us. And I'm like, oh, didn't even know he was there. We continue on. And from this point on, my dear high friend, they get higher, and specifically the guy can't keep his hands out of his pants. And the thing is, yes, I state in the rules at the beginning, do not have your hands in your pants. If you're doing something sexual, I will ask you to leave. But I didn't want to say anything to him because I don't think he was doing anything sexual. Like, he was just like adjusting his underwear and just like leaving his hands sitting in his pants. And it was casual. He clearly was not feeling himself up, though his other hand was often lifting his shirt and like touching his stomach in a way that did feel a little bit like he was filling himself up. But that hand was visible, so I was just sort of like, it's fine. We're ignoring this. But then we get to the Lollery Mansion, and a guy comes up that's not part of the tour and is like, oh my god, is this a tour? To which, of course, I respond, yes, sir, it is. And he's like, oh, okay. And he goes and walks away. And I'm like, okay, whatever, dude, who gives a fuck? And I'm telling this story, and I occasionally notice that some of my guests keep shooting eyes across the street. I'm like, I wonder what's happening across the street. I wonder if there's somebody being weird back there. And a couple times I sort of half turn to try to see if there's anyone back there, but I don't see anything. So I keep going until I get near the end of the story, and I hear someone clearly responding to the things I'm saying. Like I was saying, oh, she got away. He was like, oh my god, that's terrible. And finally, I glance over at just the right moment to realize the guy never effing left. He's been standing right behind me the entire time. So as we're walking away, I was talking to the high couple because they were at the front of the group, and I was like, guys, why didn't you tell me? There was someone just standing behind me the entire time. And they were like, oh. And I'm like, oh my god. But the good news is, from that point on, the guy mostly stopped having his hand inside of his clothing and instead just started shadowboxing random things. Mostly the air, but he also shadowboxed a couple of posts, a street sign. And to say it was a little bit distracting would be an understatement, but at least he was being quiet during those moments. Because he also got 3 more phone calls in the last half of the tour. And each time he'd step like 1 step away and have a full conversation like 1 step away. He's meeting up with some friends later tonight. I know more about his plans than I want to. And at least he'd step away. We got to the last stop, and his girlfriend received a call. And when I heard that phone ring, I was about ready to slap somebody. But to make it even worse, she didn't step away from the group to answer the call. She just literally picks up her phone, standing right next to the other guest, being like, oh yeah, hi Kelly. Yeah, we're talking about meeting up with y'all later. And I'm like, what? And like, I'm trying to continue the story and just talk over her, because at this point, I just want to be done and go home. But I also will admit I'm 90% sure I shot her eyes of death, because she hung up after a few moments going, I think I need to talk to you later. Bye. And of course, they walk away without tipping.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, and feel free to share your own experiences in the comments below.